The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet park, its rays filtering through the canopy of towering oak trees. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, creating a gentle rustling that blended with the distant chirping of sparrows. The air smelled fresh, carrying faint hints of pine and blooming wildflowers from a nearby meadow. A narrow path wound through the trees, its gravel crunching underfoot with every step. In the distance, faint laughter echoed, the kind that comes from children playing without a care in the world. The park was alive, yet peaceful, with nature's symphony providing a calming backdrop. Crickets chirping softly in the underbrush, and the occasional flutter of a bird's wings breaking the stillness. A wooden bench sat slightly off the path, its weathered surface worn smooth by time. Nearby, a creek meandered lazily, its crystal-clear waters catching the sunlight and reflecting it in dazzling patterns. The gentle gurgle of the stream added to the serene atmosphere, while the occasional splash from a darting fish rippled across its surface. Above, the sky was a canvas of soft blue, streaked with feathery white clouds that seemed almost motionless in the calm air. Every so often, a squirrel darted from tree to tree, its movements quick and purposeful, while a pair of butterflies flitted lazily through the sun-dappled clearing. The world seemed to slow down here, as if time itself respected the tranquility of the moment. Yet, beneath the peaceful exterior, a sense of anticipation lingered, like the quiet before a summer storm. At the edge of the clearing, where the dense woods began to reclaim the land, shadows deepened, their edges blurring as the sun sank lower. It was here that the faintest rustle could be heard, almost too soft to notice, as if something, or someone, watched silently from the cover of the trees. The park remained undisturbed, a sanctuary of calm and beauty, but the unseen presence added an unspoken tension, a subtle shift in the air that was impossible to ignore. A young boy, no older than 7, wandered along the gravel path, his small boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust with each carefree step. His laughter rang out softly, blending with the sounds of the park, as he trailed a brightly colored kite clutched in his hand. The kite's tail fluttered in the breeze, catching the sunlight in quick flashes. His cheeks were rosy, and his hair, slightly tousled from the wind, fell into his eyes as he tilted his head back to watch the kite dance in the sky. The boy's excitement was palpable, every movement bursting with the boundless energy only a child could have. He veered off the main path, his curiosity guiding him toward the creek where smooth stones glistened in the shallow water. Kneeling at the edge, he reached out to touch the rippling surface, his small fingers skimming the cold water with a delighted giggle. A dragonfly buzzed past, drawing his attention, and he leapt to his feet, chasing it with clumsy but determined strides. His steps took him further from the path, deeper into the shaded grove where the trees stood taller and the underbrush grew thicker. Unaware of how far he had strayed, the boy paused, his tiny frame dwarfed by the towering trees around him. His gaze flickered toward the shadows, where the sunlight struggled to reach, but his innocence kept him from noticing the subtle shift in the air. A single bird called out from a branch above, its sharp note startling him momentarily. He glanced over his shoulder, realizing for the first time that the voices of others had grown faint. Despite his unease, the boy pressed on, stepping cautiously over the uneven ground, the crunch of twigs and leaves underfoot the only sound accompanying him now. His kite trailed behind him, forgotten, its tail snagging on low-hanging branches. He hesitated at the edge of a small clearing, where the undergrowth gave way to open space. The air felt cooler here, and the boy shivered slightly, hugging his arms around himself. In his innocent exploration, he hadn't noticed how far he had wandered, or how alone he had become in the stillness of the trees. From the shadows of the dense woods, a German shepherd emerged, its movements slow and deliberate. The dog's once proud frame was now thin and weathered, its ribs faintly visible beneath a coat matted with dirt and tangled fur. One ear stood alert, while the other drooped slightly, as if burdened by past injuries. A faint scar ran across its muzzle, a quiet testament to battles endured and its amber eyes, sharp and watchful, scanned the clearing with a mixture of caution and curiosity. The dog limped slightly, favoring one paw, but its stance remained strong, a hint of resilience shining through the weariness. Its gaze locked onto the boy, who was now standing near the edge of the creek, his back turned to the woods. The shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of the child's laughter, its body stiffening as it assessed the scene. For a moment, the dog hesitated, shifting its weight uneasily, as if torn between remaining hidden and stepping closer. The wind carried the boy's scent, mingled with the fresh smell of water and earth, and the dog's nose quivered as it sniffed the air. The shepherd lowered its body slightly, blending into the shadows, its eyes never leaving the boy. There was something instinctive, almost protective, in its demeanor, an unspoken understanding of the child's vulnerability. Each movement was calculated, every sound around it analyzed with the precision of a creature that had learned survival the hard way. A twig snapped beneath its paw, causing the dog to freeze, its ears pinned back as it glanced around, wary of being noticed. But then its focus returned to the boy, who had begun to wander further from the clearing, his small frame inching closer to the dense underbrush. The shepherd's tail flicked once, a subtle motion that hinted at its growing unease. The child was too far from safety, too close to the unknown, and though the dog remained still, its muscles tensed as though preparing for something. There was a quiet intensity in its amber eyes, a readiness born of experience. As it crouched low, waiting and watching, its presence an unseen guardian in the shadows. In the thick silence of the grove, something stirred, a low, guttural growl that rumbled faintly from the depths of the underbrush. Hidden within the tangled shadows of brambles and roots, a pair of eyes glinted, sharp and unblinking, their amber hue catching the fading sunlight. The creature moved with predatory grace, its sleek body blending seamlessly with the dappled patterns of light and shadow. Each step was calculated, deliberate. As it crept closer to the clearing where the boy stood, his small frame oblivious to the threat that now stalked him. The child's laughter rang out once more, echoing faintly through the trees, but the sound was swallowed quickly by the thickening tension in the air. The predator's ears flicked toward the noise, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of innocence, a scent that spurred its hunger. A branch snapped beneath its weight, a sharp crack that seemed deafening in the stillness, but the boy didn't turn. He was too engrossed in the smooth stones he was piling beside the creek, his back turned fully to the forest behind him. The German shepherd's ears perked, its body rigid as it crouched low, hidden among the ferns. Its keen eyes flickered between the boy and the predator, tracking every slow, measured step that brought the creature closer. The dog's breath came in soft, controlled puffs, each one visible in the cool air, as if even the act of exhaling could betray its position. The shadows deepened as the sun sank lower, casting the grove in an eerie half-light. The predator's movements grew bolder, its claws scraping against the bark of a fallen tree as it closed the distance. A sudden shift in the wind carried its musky scent toward the dog, and the shepherd's lips curled into a silent snarl, its teeth bared in quiet defiance. Still, the boy remained unaware, his attention fixed on the tiny ripples forming in the creek as he tossed in small stones. The predator paused, lowering its body even closer to the ground, its muscles coiled like a spring. The tension was palpable, the moment hanging in fragile stillness, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves as it prepared to strike. The German shepherd crouched low in the shadows, its amber eyes fixed on the predator, inching closer to the boy. Every instinct in its body screamed to act, to leap forward and stop what was about to happen, but a deeper fear held it rooted in place. Its body trembled, the muscles in its legs taut, as if caught in an invisible tug-of-war. A low growl rumbled in its throat, barely audible, but the sound faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. Memories it couldn't shake, of raised voices, harsh hands, and darkened cages, clawed at the edges of its mind, each one a chain pulling it back. The dog's paws shifted restlessly against the ground, the soft crunch of dried leaves beneath them betraying its unease. Its tail twitched erratically, a small, involuntary motion that mirrored the turmoil within. The familiar pang of distrust flared in its chest, a wariness forged through years of abandonment and mistreatment. Humans had always been a source of pain, their actions leaving scars far deeper than the ones visible on its body. Now, as it watched the boy's small figure framed in the fading light, its fear and instinct collided in a battle that seemed impossible to win. It took a step forward, the movement hesitant and jerky, but immediately recoiled, ears flattening against its head. The shepherd's breath quickened, visible in short, misty puffs that hovered in the cool air. Its heart pounded like a drum, the sound almost deafening in its chest, each beat a reminder of the stakes. A sharp bark started to rise in its throat, but the sound was swallowed, leaving only a faint whimper. The predator moved closer, its intent unmistakable, and the boy, still blissfully unaware, remained within arm's reach of danger. The shepherd's eyes darted between the boy and the looming threat, its claws digging into the earth as it fought against the paralyzing grip of fear. This was no time to hesitate, yet it couldn't shake the weight of its past, the voice in its head whispering that trust would only lead to pain. But then the boy laughed again, a bright, carefree sound that cut through the tension like sunlight piercing a storm. Something shifted in the dog's gaze, a spark of determination flaring against the shadows of its doubt. It stilled for a moment, ears pricking forward, as if making a silent decision. The predator crept closer, its movements silent and deliberate, each step bringing it nearer to the boy. The air seemed to grow heavier, the stillness pressing in like a warning unheeded. Its eyes locked onto the child, narrowing with predatory intent, while its sleek body slid through the shadows, muscles rippling under its fur. Only a few paces now separated it from its target, and it lowered its body even further, poised to strike. The boy, still preoccupied with the smooth stones he was skipping across the creek, remained blissfully unaware, his laughter a stark contrast to the impending danger. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of the predator's slow, deliberate breaths, and its eyes darted between the boy and the approaching threat. It rose slightly from its crouch, its body tense and quivering with energy, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to release. A low growl rumbled deep in its chest, this time louder, more certain, but it quickly stifled the sound, aware that any premature noise could startle the predator into action. The boy wandered a step closer to the underbrush, the soles of his boots crunching against the dry leaves that blanketed the forest floor. A faint breeze tousled his hair, and he bent down to pick up another rock, his face alight with concentration. He had no idea how close he was to danger, how the shadows behind him now held a shape that meant him harm. The shepherd's breathing grew faster, its amber eyes burning with a mix of fear and resolve. The scars of its past no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered now was the child. It stepped forward, leaving the safety of the shadows, and the sunlight caught the faint sheen of its matted coat. Its head lowered, its teeth bared, and a sharper growl escaped, this one intentional, a sound meant to warn and challenge. The predator paused, its ears flicking toward the noise, but it did not retreat. Instead, it crouched lower, its movements becoming more deliberate, and the distance between it and the boy shrank even further. The shepherd took another step forward, its growls growing louder, its resolve now overpowering the hesitation that had once held it back. The line between fear and courage had blurred, and with every inch the predator advanced, the dog prepared itself for what it knew must come next. The German shepherd stood still for a heartbeat, its amber eyes locked on the predator, now only a step away from the boy. Fear clawed at its chest, a familiar weight threatening to anchor it to the ground, but something deeper stirred, an instinct that surged like a flame, burning away hesitation. The air around it felt charged, every sound amplified, the faint rustle of the predator's movements, the boy's soft hum as he played, and the rapid, thudding pulse of its own heartbeat. Time seemed to stretch, each second a test of the dog's resolve. The predator's muscles tensed, its body shifting as it prepared to lunge. The shepherd's nostrils flared, its breathing sharp and uneven as it took a single step forward, then stopped, its paws trembling against the earth. Memories of pain flashed like distant lightning, chains tightening, harsh voices yelling. But they faded as quickly as they came, replaced by the sight of the boy's small figure, vulnerable and unaware. A growl built in the dog's throat, low and guttural, growing louder as it forced itself to take another step. The wind carried the boy's scent again, mingled now with the musk of the predator, and the shepherd's head lowered further, its ears pinned back. Its lips curled to reveal sharp teeth, and its growl deepened into something primal, a warning, a challenge, and a declaration all at once. The predator froze, its yellow eyes narrowing as it finally registered the dog's presence. For a moment, the two locked gazes, the tension between them palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. Then the predator shifted, its hesitation giving way to renewed intent, and that was all it took. The shepherd surged forward, its body moving with a speed and power that defied its battered frame. Every ounce of fear and doubt was left behind in that instant, replaced by an unshakable drive to protect. The ground blurred beneath its paws as it charged, the growl ripping free into a bark that echoed through the trees. The boy turned, startled by the sudden sound, and his wide eyes met the shepherd's just as it leapt, placing itself between him and the advancing threat. The moment hung suspended, the shepherd's body a shield, its courage a silent roar, as it faced the predator head-on. The shepherd lunged forward with a ferocity that seemed to shake the air itself, its bark splitting the silence like a crack of thunder. The predator recoiled for an instant, its yellow eyes widening in surprise before narrowing with renewed aggression. The child stumbled backward, his small foot catching on a root, and he fell hard to the ground, a gasp escaping his lips as he scrambled to push himself away. The dog's body was already in motion, a blur of matted fur and raw determination, placing itself firmly between the boy and the looming danger. The predator snarled, its sleek body crouching low as it prepared to attack. The shepherd stood its ground, growling deep and low, its tail stiff and its teeth bared. The two locked eyes, a standoff charged with raw energy, neither willing to yield. The predator lunged first, its claws slashing through the air, but the dog twisted sharply, evading the strike by inches. The shepherd countered with a snap of its jaws, its teeth grazing the predator's flank, enough to drive it back momentarily, but not enough to deter it completely. The boy, still sprawled on the ground, began to crawl backward, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. A sharp yelp from the shepherd drew his wide eyes forward, where he saw the predator make another move, its claws swiping dangerously close to the dog's chest. The shepherd staggered but didn't falter, its resolve unwavering despite the odds. With a powerful leap, it slammed its body into the predator, the impact sending both tumbling into the dirt. The predator was quicker to recover, snapping at the dog's hind leg as the shepherd scrambled to its feet. The bite landed, and a sharp cry of pain escaped the dog, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it turned sharply, using its momentum to ram into the predator once more, forcing it further from the boy. The child froze, watching in awe and terror as the dog stood tall despite the growing list of injuries, its determination etched into every trembling muscle. Finally, the predator hesitated, its movements faltering as the shepherd let out another fierce bark, the sound reverberating through the grove. The boy clung to a nearby tree for balance, his chest heaving, as the predator slinked back into the shadows, its amber eyes flickering one last time before disappearing into the forest. The shepherd stood, battered but unyielding, its amber eyes scanning the clearing before turning to the boy, who now stared at it with tear-streaked gratitude. The boy sat frozen where he had fallen, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. His wide eyes darted between the shadows where the predator had vanished and the German shepherd standing before him, its body still trembling from the encounter. Tears streaked his dirt-smudged cheeks, and his small hands clutched at the ground beneath him, as though anchoring himself to the safety of the earth. Slowly, his fear began to fade, replaced by a dawning realization of what had just happened. The shepherd turned to face him fully, its amber eyes softening as they met his, and the boy let out a shaky breath, his lips quivering as he whispered, "Good dog." The dog stood tall for a moment longer, its ears perked and nose twitching as if ensuring the danger had truly passed. Then, with a soft whimper, it shifted its weight, favoring one leg. Blood matted its fur along its hind leg where the predator's teeth had left deep, angry gashes, and a thin line of crimson trickled down its side, staining the coarse, dirt-streaked coat. A shallow cut ran along its muzzle, and its breathing came in short, uneven bursts. The dog swayed slightly, exhaustion overtaking the adrenaline that had driven it moments ago, but it stayed on its feet, its gaze fixed protectively on the boy. The child wiped at his face with a trembling hand, his small frame shivering as the tension began to melt away. He crawled forward cautiously, his movements hesitant but filled with a quiet determination. "Are you okay?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. The shepherd lowered its head slightly, its tail giving a faint wag despite the obvious pain it was in. As he reached out a tentative hand, the boy's fear gave way to an overwhelming sense of gratitude. His fingers brushed the dog's fur, warm and damp with sweat and blood, and he let out a quiet sob. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking. The shepherd leaned into his touch, its amber eyes closing briefly as if finding solace in the child's small, gentle hand. For a moment, the two remained there, surrounded by the quiet of the woods, a bond forged in the aftermath of danger, unspoken but unbreakable. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the stillness as the boy's family emerged from the nearby trail, their voices sharp with panic. "There you are," his mother cried, her face pale as she rushed forward and dropped to her knees, wrapping the boy in a tight embrace. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched him, her hands running over his arms and shoulders as though to reassure herself he was unharmed. "Are you okay? What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. The boy nodded shakily, his small arms clinging to her, but his gaze drifted past her to the German shepherd standing a few feet away. His father followed close behind, his brows furrowed in concern as his eyes landed on the dog. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low with both confusion and awe. The shepherd, battered and bloodied, stood silently, its head slightly bowed, but its eyes steady and alert, watching the scene unfold. The man's expression softened as he took in the injuries and the way the dog seemed to shield the boy even now, its body positioned protectively between him and the woods. "She saved me," the boy whispered, pulling away from his mother just enough to point at the dog. "She scared it away." His voice broke, and he turned, stumbling toward the shepherd before either parent could stop him. The boy threw his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in its fur. "Thank you," he murmured, his small frame trembling with emotion. The shepherd stiffened at first, and used to such closeness, but then it lowered its head, leaning gently into the boy's embrace. Its tail gave a faint wag, as though responding to the warmth and gratitude in the child's touch. The mother pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening as she watched the exchange. "She's hurt," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "We have to help her." The father nodded, stepping closer and crouching down to get a better look at the shepherd's injuries. "Good girl," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with respect. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" The dog's amber eyes met his briefly, tired but unyielding, as if acknowledging his words. The family's concern enveloped the moment, their gratitude unspoken, yet deeply felt as they rallied around the unlikely hero who had saved their son. The German shepherd stood unsteadily, its legs trembling beneath the weight of exhaustion. Every breath it took was labored, its chest rising and falling unevenly as it struggled to stay upright. The wounds along its side glistened in the fading light, the blood matting its fur and creating dark, sticky patches that contrasted sharply with its dirt-streaked coat. A deeper gash on its hind leg oozed slowly, the crimson stark against its trembling frame. Its head drooped slightly, and its amber eyes, once fierce with determination, now flickered with fatigue, the fire within dimmed but not extinguished. The boy's father knelt beside the dog, his voice low and soothing as he extended a cautious hand. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, carefully brushing his fingers along her uninjured shoulder. The shepherd flinched at first, a faint whimper escaping its throat, but when she realized he meant no harm, her body relaxed just enough to let him near. "We need to help her," the boy's mother said softly, stepping forward with a bottle of water she had pulled from her bag. The father poured some into a shallow dish, setting it gently on the ground. The dog hesitated, her wary eyes darting between the humans and the boy, who stood close by, clutching the hem of his mother's jacket. "It's okay," the boy whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "You can trust us?" Slowly, the shepherd leaned forward, her tongue darting out to lap at the cool water. She drank in slow, deliberate gulps, pausing to lift her head and glance around as though afraid the danger might return. The mother disappeared briefly, returning with a soft blanket she had pulled from the car. She crouched beside the dog, her movements careful and deliberate, draping the blanket over the shepherd's back. The dog flinched again, but the warmth seemed to soothe her, and she let out a low, shaky sigh as her body finally began to relax. "Let's get her some food," the father said, his tone firm but gentle, and within moments, a small bowl of bread and scraps was placed near her paws. The shepherd sniffed it cautiously, her hunger overtaking her hesitation as she began to eat in small, measured bites. The family watched in quiet reverence, their hearts aching for the broken creature who, despite her injuries and fear, had risked everything to protect their child. The German shepherd lay curled on the blanket, her body still tense, though her eyes had softened with the first hints of trust. The family kept their distance at first, speaking to her in low, soothing tones, careful not to overwhelm her. The boy, unable to stay away for long, inched closer, his small steps deliberate as he knelt beside her. His tiny hand hesitated just above her fur, hovering with uncertainty, before he finally reached out and rested it gently on her side. The dog flinched but didn't pull away, her amber eyes flicking toward him. Slowly, she let out a soft sigh, her body relaxing beneath his touch. "You're safe now," the boy whispered, his voice trembling but filled with a quiet conviction. He stroked her matted fur in slow, gentle motions, his fingers careful not to press near her wounds. The shepherd's breathing slowed, the sharp, uneven rhythm giving way to something steadier as she leaned into his hand, her head dipping lower onto the blanket. The mother watched from a few steps away, her arms crossed over her chest as she blinked back tears. "She's trusting us," she murmured to her husband, who nodded silently, his gaze fixed on the dog. The boy's quiet determination seemed to bridge a gap words couldn't, his soft whispers and tender gestures breaking through the layers of fear that had kept the dog guarded. The boy lay down beside her, his small frame curled next to hers, and rested his head lightly on her uninjured shoulder. The shepherd stiffened at first, her ears twitching, but as his warmth seeped into her, she let out another sigh and closed her eyes. "Good girl," he said softly, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. The father crouched down nearby, offering another small bowl of food. This time, the dog didn't hesitate. She glanced at the boy once, as if for reassurance, before carefully nibbling at the scraps. The sight made the mother smile faintly, her hand brushing away a tear. "She's part of the family now," she said quietly. As the evening deepened, the boy stayed by the shepherd's side, his hand resting gently on her fur. The unspoken bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment, a quiet understanding that neither fear nor pain could diminish. The decision was made as naturally as the sun rose the next morning, unspoken yet undeniable. The family had come to see the shepherd as one of their own, a protector, a survivor, and now, a part of their lives. The father knelt beside her with a bowl of warm water, his hand steady as he cleaned the dried blood from her fur. "You've been through a lot," he murmured softly, his touch gentle despite the dog's occasional flinch. He worked carefully around the gash on her hind leg, wrapping it with clean gauze while she watched him with tired but trusting eyes. Nearby, the boy placed an old pillow near the fireplace, fluffing it up with the excitement only a child could bring. "This is for you," he said with a shy smile, patting the pillow as he glanced at the dog. The shepherd tilted her head slightly, as though trying to understand his gesture, before slowly lowering herself onto it. Her body sank into the soft cushion, and for the first time, she seemed to truly relax. The mother brought over a fresh bowl of food, the aroma wafting through the room. She set it down close to the dog, crouching nearby to gently stroke the uninjured part of her back. "You're staying with us," she said softly, her voice warm and steady. "You're safe now." The shepherd turned her head toward her, the faintest wag of her tail brushing against the blanket beneath her. The boy sat cross-legged beside the pillow, his small hands busy untangling knots in the dog's fur with a brush his mother had given him. "She's so brave," he said, glancing at his parents. "She saved me. She deserves this." His words hung in the air, a simple truth that none of them could deny. The father stood and surveyed the scene, the boy's quiet devotion, the mother's nurturing care, and the shepherd finally resting with her head on her paws, her amber eyes closing in contentment. "She belongs here," he said firmly, and the room seemed to echo his words. From that moment, the shepherd had a name: Hero. It was a name that spoke to her courage, her resilience, and the place she had earned in their family. Over the weeks that followed, the shepherd's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Her once frail body, marked by protruding ribs and matted fur, began to fill out, her coat gaining a healthy sheen as the family's care worked its quiet magic. The wounds on her side and leg healed steadily, the scars softening into faint lines that bore witness to her past struggles but no longer defined her. She moved with increasing ease, her limp fading as strength returned to her limbs, and the hesitation that once clouded her amber eyes gave way to a quiet confidence. Her days, once spent curled on the old pillow by the fireplace, now spilled into the backyard, where the boy's laughter mingled with the shepherd's playful barks. The two became inseparable, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. The boy would toss a worn tennis ball across the yard, his excitement bubbling over as she raced after it with surprising speed. She returned each time with her tail wagging furiously, dropping the ball at his feet before nudging his hand with her nose, silently asking for another round. There were moments when her past still surfaced. A sudden noise would make her flinch, or an unfamiliar face would bring a wary growl. But those moments grew rarer as her trust in the family deepened. The boy seemed to sense her lingering fears and would crouch beside her, wrapping his small arms around her neck. "You're okay now," he'd whisper, stroking her fur. "We'll always take care of you." And she, in turn, would lean into him, her eyes soft and her body completely at ease. One afternoon, as the boy tumbled in the grass, laughing uncontrollably, the shepherd joined him, her powerful frame moving with surprising gentleness as she nudged him playfully. When he fell onto his back, she leaned over him, her tongue darting out to lick his cheek, making him squeal with joy. His parents watched from the porch, smiling at the sight of their son and the dog who had become part of their family. The shadows of her past seemed to lift with each joyful moment, replaced by the light of her new life. The scars that had once marked her as broken now stood as symbols of her strength, and the love she had found in this home mended wounds that no medicine ever could. The shepherd's new life with the family unfolded like a story of quiet joy, filled with moments that spoke louder than words ever could. In the mornings, she would sit by the boy as he ate his breakfast, her head resting gently on his lap as he shared bits of toast with her, laughing at the way her tail wagged at every crumb. As the sun climbed higher, she would race him across the yard, her paws pounding the earth as he chased after her with mock determination. She always slowed just enough to let him catch up, turning to nudge him playfully before bounding away again, her bark echoing with happiness. Afternoons were their favorite time together. The boy would lie in the shade of the big oak tree, a book open in his lap, while the shepherd curled beside him, her head resting on his knee. Her ears would twitch at the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, but her eyes remained half-closed, content in the simple peace of the moment. Sometimes he would lean down and read aloud to her, his voice soft and steady, and though she couldn't understand the words, she would watch him with an expression that seemed almost like understanding. Evenings brought the whole family together, the warmth of the house spilling out onto the porch as they sat watching the stars emerge one by one. The boy's mother would stroke the shepherd's fur, her fingers brushing over the faint scars that now seemed like distant memories. The father would toss a stick across the yard, and though the dog was no longer a pup, she would leap after it with a vigor that spoke of her newfound strength. When she returned, she would drop it at his feet with a proud wag of her tail, her eyes sparkling in the glow of the porch light. As the day faded into night, the shepherd would follow the boy to his room, her paws padding softly against the wooden floor. She would settle at the foot of his bed, her body a comforting presence as he drifted off to sleep. The family's laughter, their quiet moments of care, and their unspoken bond had created a life that was simple but complete. For the shepherd, it was a world she had never known, a life of love, safety, and belonging. The German shepherd's journey had been nothing short of extraordinary, a story written in resilience and courage. Once a stray wandering through the wilderness, battered by the weight of abandonment and the scars of her past, she had been a creature defined by survival. Her thin frame and hesitant steps told of days spent fighting for scraps, of nights spent trembling against the cold. Her amber eyes, though sharp and watchful, had been clouded with mistrust, a reflection of the harsh world she had known. Yet, through it all, she had carried within her an unyielding spark, a quiet strength that refused to be extinguished. That spark had ignited on the day she stood between a boy and the danger that threatened him. In that moment, she became more than a stray. She became a protector, a hero. Her body bore the marks of the struggle, but it was her spirit that emerged triumphant, fierce and unbroken. She had faced the predator with a bravery that defied her weariness, her every move driven by an instinct to shield the innocent life before her. Now, as she lay in the warmth of her new home, her transformation was undeniable. The ribs that once pressed against her skin were hidden beneath a healthy coat that shone in the sunlight. Her cautious steps had turned into joyful strides, her tail wagging freely as she raced across the yard with the boy she had saved. The scars that had once defined her were no longer reminders of pain, but symbols of the battles she had overcome. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by trust and contentment as she nestled beside the family that had become her own. She no longer flinched at a gentle touch or shied away from a kind voice. Instead, she leaned into the boy's embrace, her head resting against his chest, her eyes closing in peace. From a stray on the edge of survival to a cherished member of a family, her journey was a testament to the power of love and second chances. She had given her all to protect the boy, and in return, she had found what she had always deserved: a home, a purpose, and a place where she truly belonged.